Good afternoon. Welcome to Family.Inc. Expert Interviews. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Joline Godfrey, an expert and innovator in the field of financial education for families and in particular children. Today's discussion is titled Financial Literacy for Families, Preparing Your Children for a Life of Plenty. Before we begin, a little housekeeping. If you have any questions throughout the session, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Joline, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
A little context for those who are watching today. You grew up in a family business, you trained as a clinical social worker in some of the toughest parts of Boston, and you've spent years advocating for women's financial empowerment. You've dedicated much of your life to educating women, families, and children, and subsequently you were awarded an honorary doctorate in business from Bentley College for your achievements in financial education. You were a Kellogg Leadership Fellow, and you've been recognized in features for The Today Show, Oprah, Fortune, Business Week, Inc. magazine, and the New York Times, and Family.Inc., of course. You are currently at work on 2 new books focused on what makes families thrive, and you're the founder of Bounce 10, a creative play-based program to help parents give young children a foundation of financial readiness to serve them throughout their lives. And it's an absolute pleasure to have you on. We connected 18 months ago, 2 years ago at this point, and I guess let's call it hit it off. I love the work that you do. I love your focus area. It's so germane to the clients that I work with and affluent families. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's fun to be here. I would agree. We hit it off. There is some synergy here between what you're up to and I'm up to that I find very exciting. So it's good to be here.
Yeah. So Joline, before we get started and diving in, talk to us about your experiences and how your life experience inform the work that you're doing now, your focus area, and how you've applied some of those learnings to Bounce 10.
Try to be brief because it was a long, strange journey, as the Grateful Dead used to say. For those people who have ever seen Steve Jobs' last commencement speech, one of the memorable things he said at the time was, you can't make sense of your life looking forward. You can only make sense looking back. And he, in that speech, talked about the strange things he did that finally culminated in his work for the Apple computer. And I resonated with his story so much because for much of my life, I would have said to you, not quite sure what I'm doing right now or why I'm doing it. But in retrospect, it all brought me exactly to where I needed to be, which is working with families whose children are growing up in the context of abundance. And as we know, that's not as much of a walk in the park as lots of people would like to think. I certainly grew up in a family business. I then married into a business family and saw how complex both of those environments can be. And because I'm trained developmentally, one of the things that always puzzled me, I guess, and then kind of made me a little angry down the road was we wait until people are in trouble. We wait until they've screwed up somehow in life, in their teens or their 20-somethings, and we try to fix whatever is going wrong, particularly if it has an economic edge to it. So, kids who are spending too much or whose habits their parents are uneasy about or whatever, we try to fix things later in life. And because I am trained developmentally, I kept thinking, why are we not starting earlier? But I could never get anybody to pay attention. And, it's expensive, frankly, to start early. Somebody at one of the big banks said to me, oh, Joline, when we think about next gen, we think 25 and over because you can't make any money off anybody under 25. And so I thought, this explains why nobody will talk to me.
That's right. Exactly.
Anyway, I'm still a practicing social worker, but I am one with this very weird hybrid experience in the world of multifamily offices, family offices. My current family is 165 people, huge. Um, and I even spent a little time working in one of the big banks. So I've had a really interesting convergence of experiences in both finance and in family. So that's how
Yep.
I got.
I love it. Let's kind of lean in then. All right. The challenges that you see, and I'm going to say the word abundance as well, because you use that and I prefer it and think it's sort of the right fit. Families with abundance. The challenges that you see and that you're trying to tackle in your work as they look at raising the next gen. What are they?
One that I'm actually working on this week is being truthful with kids. It's about the fact that when kids are growing up in abundance and parents want to say no to something, ordinary parents can say, "Oh, honey, we can't afford that." Kids who are growing up in families where they obviously can afford it know, even as young as 3, 4, and 5, that their parents are just telling them tales.
Mm,
And so the whole business of the fundamentals of economics for children are such that parents have to make things up. That is not a good way to start a trusting relationship in
yeah.
families. And so the simplest things of teaching wants and needs, for example, to little ones gets
Hmm.
complicated. The simplest things about allowances, for example, are difficult because even 6-year-olds have cash flow problems. And, we build these myths about, well, you have um, a basket for your spending, a basket for giving, a basket for saving, and that
Yep.
should take care of it. Again, it is so simplistic. And many families have very um, sophisticated children who understand immediately that something is off here. So I think the fact is the rules of financial education for little ones in families with abundance are completely different, but we've all tried to pretend they're the same as everybody else.
Hmm.
That doesn't work. You have to acknowledge it's a different culture, it's a different environment, it requires different practices, different tools.
Yep.
And so I'm really excited that I'm these days working with a lot of families and companies, frankly, that are figuring out that what worked, 25, 30 years ago just is no longer functional.
So Jolene, if let's call it the rules and tools are different, what do the rules and tools look like and how do they differ?
Uh, Um, well, first of all, the landscape was different, right? I
Hmm.
mean, you could actually count money, take it out of your wallet, and kids would see it, and it was tangible, it was analog. Today,
Yeah.
it's all virtual. And so money in many ways has become invisible. Helping
Mm,
kids, particularly young children, understand the physicality or the concreteness of money is a much more challenging thing. So that's
yeah.
one. The second thing is that once upon a time, you actually had to visit some office somewhere to make an investment in something. Now you do that all online, and young kids can do it. I mean, there are legendary stories about excuse me, 12-year-olds who are killing it in the stock market because they've somehow figured out how to get online. That's a little scary for a family. Um, and then, of course, there's just the very real thing that today's children are not just local kids, they are global children. And, if Elon Musk has his way, they're going to be interstellar children. So
Mm,
we have an acceleration of change that is also whipping up the financial landscape and such that just as kids think they've mastered something, something else comes along. And at the same time, the world of influencers has heightened their anxiety. So the question of who am I? What's appropriate? How do I handle myself in the world? All those things are much more complicated than they used to be. It's a tough world for a kid to grow up in.
yeah. So this question comes up in almost every conversation I have with families when we're talking about when do we start the conversation? When do you have the conversation with your kids about money? And where my head goes is, you talk about being truthful with your kids. Where does the truth stop? Does the truth stop in the bank statement? Or so I guess two questions. Where does truth stop? And when do you begin to have these conversations? And what does that phasing look like?
Killer question. I just have to say, these are some of the best questions I get on webinars. So
Well,
thank
they're
you.
real questions that I hear, so I'm passing them to you.
I'm loving them. So I'll give you an example. When I get that question, I will often say, tongue in cheek, but not entirely. Well, when it comes to prenups, for example, nine is a good time. Now, I am truly not telling parents to start talking about prenups when they're 9.
Right.
What I am saying is that I want you to start talking about money when children are 9 or when they're 5 or when they're 4. And by that, what I mean is I don't need you to show them a spreadsheet. I don't need you to tell them real numbers. I need you to start talking to them about values and culture and expectations in your family. Children are ready to talk about money easily a decade before families are ready to talk about it. What that means is they will fill in their answers from the internet, from their peers, from their imagination, anywhere they can to get answers. If you're not talking directly to them, they're going to make things up. And
Yeah.
so when I say start talking when they're 3, 4, and 5, what I'm being really quite serious and quite concrete. We have 10 skills at Bounce. Now, obviously, there are 100 more things that you need to know financially as you get older. But we know that it's a little bit like learning the ABCs. If you want to learn to read, you've got to learn your ABCs and you move on from there and practice over time. Same thing with money. You've got to begin with some basics and give some practice and um, give experience in the milieu where the kids are safe and you know that everything around them can be trusted. So I think that families shy away from the conversations for the very reason you infer, which is they're terrified the kid is going to say, yeah, but really, how much does the house cost? And how much is in my trust? And they will ask those questions when they are 11 years old. I mean, they are precocious. And what I have come to understand is those are great questions that they should be asking. You are the grown-up though, and your response is something like, and there are many of them, but it's something like, that's a killer question. What makes you ask? Or that's a great question. Let's look at that together. That's a great question. What do you need to know in order to really understand that? And what you're doing is not shutting them down. You're giving them a sense of this is a bigger question than you're going to give in 2 minutes. You also need to be able to take a breath as a client, as a parent, because that question is so big. They are asking you who you are, what your expectations for that family are, and they are asking questions often that families haven't settled for themselves. So one of the things I see is it prompts the family into bigger conversations for themselves.
Can you give me an example of that, Joline? Like, help me put that into perspective a little bit more.
Parents want me to come in and help kids do a budget.
Okay.
And that's completely reasonable. And I will say, okay, fine. So, what are they spending? Well, the parent might say, oh, I don't know, $100 a week. Well, when I sit down with that child, that $100 a week is for sure. And that's a visible allowance. The invisible allowance that is supporting that child, all the other things that the parent is subsidizing properly, parent, isn't getting accounted for. So what you're doing is already setting up an instance in which neither parent or child is really dealing with reality. I do not think the children have the right to know the parents' personal finances. They do not have the right to know information that they can't make any sense out of.
Yeah.
What they do have the right to know is that here are some of the boundaries of money. Here's what you need to know in order to learn more about money, but particularly for children who are going to have access to trusts and will need to sign off for them at 16 or 17 or 18. And that may even just be as simple as a 529. It doesn't have to be a
Right.
monster trust.
Right.
Those kids are asking questions early on. And again, if we are not building in opportunities for families to sit at the dinner table or after dinner or in the car or to be engaged with one another to have these conversations, then they'll either tune you out or they'll go get the information elsewhere and you won't like what they get.
I wrote, I think it was last week, the week before, a newsletter that talks about kind of turning up the volume and how money doesn't make the person. It just sort of enhances or heightens the sort of the behavior and the character of the individual who has it.
Right.
As I think about what you're saying, it seems to me the overarching sense is that it's more about family culture
Mhm.
and culture and conversation and having dialogue, real dialogue between parents and their kids about what you have, and what it means, and sort of maybe the responsibility that comes with it. It's those conversations that have a greater impact on kind of outcomes than,
Yes.
frankly, the money that's even there.
I think that's exactly right. I'll give you one quick case study. Um, Mother and daughter were in a tension over the daughter wanted the same handbag, the same $10,000 handbag the mother had.
Ah,
And the mother
good
quite
handbag.
a good handbag. And the mother quite appropriately said, honey, you're not going to get that handbag.
Yeah.
But the daughter, who was going to a fancy private school where that was a status symbol,
Mm.
and so that told her something about her identity, and she wanted to fit in. She wanted to be like the other girls, and the mother understood that this wasn't appropriate. Mother went off on a journey somewhere. While she was gone, the father caved and gave the kid the purse.
Mm.
The mother came home and, to her credit, did not send the purse back. But what they did do was sit down, and that mother made went through the economics of how much it cost or how much the person made who crafted the handbag by the hour, how long it would take the daughter to make that kind of money if she were working on that wage. So the mother turned it into an economics lesson, is my point. And so it's not that she was denying they could indeed afford that
Yeah.
kind of thing. Um, I don't know what the
Yeah.
conversation was between the mother and father. I'm sure it wasn't pretty, but the point is that it is much more complicated when parents are in fact living a level and, living their lives in one way. And the kid says, well, wait a minute. So can I have a Maserati? And dad says, well, no, I'm sorry, you can't. And the child comes back
Yeah.
and says, well, we can afford it. What's the problem?
Yeah.
The families I love working with are very adept at coming back quickly and saying, just because you can doesn't mean you should.
Yeah.
And it's one thing to have that sentence kind of ready to float out there any minute, and you have to keep repeating it. It is another, though, to do what you were referring to, and that is build the culture within which that statement sits comfortably, in which the family can talk about, well, what does that mean? And why shouldn't we? And what are the choices we make as a family? And what are our values, and how do we determine what those values are, and what is the voice or what's the agency that children bring to that conversation?
Yeah.
um, I watch families who do what I think of as checkbook philanthropy. They ask the kid, what do you want to give some money to? And then they'll write a check for 1,000 or 5,000 or whatever. but they don't get into the nitty-gritty of how do you make that decision and based on what and what's the strategy. And
Yeah.
you can hear that I really put a lot of faith in kids' abilities to be pretty canny about all this stuff.
Yeah.
You just have to give them a chance.
So I'm gonna play out a scenario, and I'd love to hear how you would respond to this. Um, your son or daughter goes off to school and comes back in the afternoon and says, my friends all say we're rich. How do you handle that question as a parent? What would you, Joline, say to that?
I would probably say, God, they're right. They're right. Let's sit down and take a look at our fish inventory. Now, in most of my families, when I say, let's look at our fish inventory, the first few times I say it, people are sitting there, as they may be this afternoon, thinking, what the heck is she talking about? Or they'll roll their eyes. Fish is what every financial advisor you've ever known talks about when you sit down for your quarterly review.
Yeah.
And it's financial, intellectual, social, and human capital.
Mm-hmm.
And when I work with families, what I say is, it's time to start being as concrete and granular about our other assets, our intellectual, social, and human assets, as we are financial assets. And those kids who grow up where that is a live, active, dynamic process in the family, understand that wealth is about more than money.
Mm-hmm.
Wealth is about what we know, what we're learning, what we are developing as a family. It is about the cousins that we have relationships with and our grandparents. I can tell in a nanosecond the difference between kids who have access to grandparents and those who don't. And those kids who have access to extended families, or at least some family, have a much easier time understanding who they are, what their identity is, than kids who don't. Those kids need the car I drive, the logos I wear to tell them who they are. And then human capital is the memories, the place you go every summer with your parents because that's just what you do as a family, the traditions you carry at Thanksgiving. And so I try very hard to embrace that wealth, but to expand the idea of what wealth is. And so that's where I begin. There's no point resisting it. They know you're rich. Right. To say, oh no, they're exaggerating is again to be untruthful, which is not helpful.
Yep. I love that. Joline, as I look at my own kids, I've got a 7-year-old son and on Wednesday, a 6-year-old daughter. And I can tell at this point that they approach money from two very different perspectives. When my son gets his allowance, he is super excited to go spend it on something, Legos, rocks, whatever it might be. And my daughter immediately goes to almost saving. And it's like this wiring difference between the two. We've raised them identical. We've had these conversations. How do you handle the situation where you have two kids who are so fundamentally different in the way that they view money? What is that like? What kind of thoughts or perspectives, advice do you have? Because I need it.
Well, first of all, my sympathies to you, because what's really frustrating in families, and I see this, I've never seen a family where the kids all have the same style, never. And I've worked with lots of families. Yeah. It's not one size fits all. You have to teach them each in a custom way. So the son who's just dying to get rid of that money, all I would say is go with the resistance, embrace it. The question is, well, what do you want to collect? What do you want to spend money on? How do we look at due diligence on spending? What do you really use it, lean into it in a really big way? For the saver, on the other hand, you want to avoid hoarding down the road, obviously. But again, it's leaning in. It's, well, what does that saving look like? And what does it mean to save? And, you're at heart, you're kind of an investor. How do you want to think about this? Yeah. It's not as you don't want to change their behavior. You're not going to change it. you want to grab onto it and build on it. You know, you got the book, Raffi's Superpowers.
Yeah.
Her superpower is saving. You want to build on that and
Yeah.
reframe it to, oh my God, you can really do things with this. His superpower is you want it to be, he's already a spender, but if his superpower is being a smart spender, then
Yeah.
due diligence is going to be his superpower.
Love it.
Go back to that book and use it again.
I will try it this afternoon.
Good.
Um,
Excellent.
you've mentioned a number of things, but just kind of concretely, what are a couple things that you see parents do just wrong? It's like,
Oh,
and that's kind of a hard question because I know there's a lot of context and every family parent is different. Some things that you would say, hey, try to avoid that if you can. So for those who are listening, they're going to absorb a lot, but it's like, okay, these are a couple flags that I just want to avoid if I can.
there's one story that is apocryphal and will clarify that question.
Perfect.
This is a real true story. I'm with a family. I'm waiting for them to come into the room for the family meeting. The 15-year-old is first in. He knows me and he says, Ms. Godfrey, I just want to tell you a story about the last fishing trip I took. His father comes right after him and he says, oh, Adam, there's more to life than fishing. And you watch the kid deflate. And I put that away and think, I've got to go do something with that dad. A month later, this was so weird for me. A month later, different family, different conference room, waiting for the family to come in. A different 15-year-old, completely unrelated, walks in and says, Ms. Godfrey, I want to tell you about my fishing plans. I'm going to go fly fishing in every state of the union and blog about it. His father said, wow, I bet if you got one of the outdoor sports companies, they would sponsor it. 6 months later, that 15-year-old had a blog sponsored by one of the big outdoor companies.
Love
The
it.
difference is what you and I were talking about a moment ago. Just lean into whatever craziness that kid is doing, because that's where their heart is right then. That's where their energy, their passion is.
Yeah.
The father, who had a very clear idea about what they were in the room to do that day in the family meeting, had dollars in his head. They were there to learn about money. The other place, the other family, the father understood they were there to learn how to have a thriving family. And so he was embracing his kids' passion, basically. That's the stuff that I find so juicy, so exciting. And I think, back to your first question, the convergence of the work I do with families is not just about the money and the education. It is about, what do you do to make a family whole and to really grow and be dynamic, particularly at a time when the whole world is changing so much and we are so anxious because we can't make sense of what the heck is going on and what to tell our kids.
Yes.
So this is
So
self-defense.
those examples are fantastic. Yes. And seeing that, and it's about understanding who your son or daughter is
Right.
and what makes them tick and leaning in, and it has financial repercussions down the road. Because you're building trust and communication and everything else.
That's it. I mean,
Yeah.
that kid at 15 now knows how to present. He knows how to do a proposal. He
Yeah.
knows how to do follow through. Oh my goodness, the skills that kid has, it's
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 awesome.
really moving.
That's awesome. So, Jolene, I want to talk about Bounce 10, which you are in a beta phase right now. Tell us about Bounce 10 and what you guys are hoping to accomplish with that. And I think in that, I'm one, I'll just be honest, it's a pitch for you guys and the work that you're doing, but I do want to understand what is Bounce 10 and how is it trying to take a lot of the things that we just talked about and put it into action with families?
So Bounce 10 is, as far as I know, the first real financial readiness program for families whose children are indeed growing up in the context of abundance. So
Mhm.
it's different from mass market financial education in that we are dealing with these issues from the ages, and it's specifically focused on kids from 4 to 10.
Mhm.
We talk about having 3 elements to Bounce. We talk about the journey, and we assign you a navigator. It's kind of a stand-in for me who will help you get as much as possible out of the program. There's the community, in which you get master classes and access to experts and a grandparents hour and other ways to get the kind of knowledge that you've just heard me talking about. And the final thing is a box, and that is really play, toys, and activities that teach kids the 10 basic money skills so that by the time they hit 11, 12, sort of the tween years, they have been normalized around this business of financial language and financial readiness. And it's not something you have to lecture them on. They're just prepared. They're going into the next stage. I have been frustrated all of my career with my highly bespoke work in which I do one family at a time, which is, a living laboratory. I have enjoyed it immensely. But so many families are looking for answers to the questions you're asking that Bounce is the first opportunity really I have had to be able to make this available to more families at the same time. Again, it's not mass market, and
Right.
maybe it will be someday, but right now it's just a modest scaling to help families get through these very challenging experiences.
You're faced with some of the challenges that I have. I can only serve so many clients at one time, and Family.Inc is my way of trying to democratize some of that and scale it because I just want to touch more families and be able to help them and guide them. So, in a similar way, that's Bounce 10.
Yeah,
That's great.
yeah.
What's the timeline on Bounce 10? How can people learn more about Bounce 10?
So the basic website that we have a big portal that is not available to the public yet, but the website is bounce, BOUNCE, like the ball, bounce dash 10.com.
Yeah.
And I respond to people who send me questions. It's where you learn a little bit more and submit your name and family's interest, and we get back to you. We are in closed beta, which just means we're going to go through the summer looking for all of our warts, and these are families that have
Mhm.
signed up to do that with us. Painful period, but it's good
As I
for
know with Family.Inc.
yes, you
I get
know,
it.
exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And then towards the end of the summer, we'll take a pause, make some changes, go into what I'm calling an open beta. So we are actually looking for families,
Yeah.
mostly early adopter families, obviously, who
Yeah.
would like to be part of the next beta phase. And then our intention is to launch in early 2025.
Okay.
Um, and I will say it's terrible on the one hand, as you well know, but it's really exciting on the other to finally be able to, as you put it, serve more families. I mean, that matters. So it's an interesting
That's great.
moment.
Joline, any final advice, perspective that you want to leave viewers
Oh,
around your work?
yes, one. And that is all the time families say to me, how much is it going to cost to do these things? And I want to reframe that question to what am I going to invest in my family?
Mm,
Because people are completely used to investing in education in their businesses.
yeah,
They do not think about investing in education in their families. And that's the innovation for the 21st century that we really have to make.
that's fantastic. Joline, thank you so much for being here. It's really a pleasure.
You, and hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you all for joining us here at Family.Inc. I would encourage you to check out our website at Family.Inc. for more interviews, resources focused on enterprising families. Additionally, after this discussion, you're going to receive an email from our colleagues asking for feedback. I hope you'll participate so we can improve the work we do every day. Have a wonderful day and a great week. Take care.